Back in the village, the weight of Amarachi's struggles didn't just affect her. It seeped into the very fabric of her family. Her mother, who had always been the pillar of strength for the household, was now crumbling under the pressure of worry and heartbreak. Her blood pressure rose as her mind was constantly laced with thoughts about Amarachi's shattered dreams, the family's survival, and what the future held for her children. Amarachi, despite her own pain, couldn't afford to give in to despair. She had to stay back in the village to support her mother. Her days were filled with hard labor, working tirelessly on other people's farms just to scrape together enough money for her mother's treatment and to keep the household afloat. The once bright and determined girl who dreamt of a better life was now bending under the harsh reality of survival, but her spirit remained unbroken. After weeks of care and sacrifice, Amarachi's mother began to recover, and with her newfound strength, she gathered Amarachi and her younger sister, Ada, one evening under the moonlit sky. Sitting together in their small compound, she shared tales filled with wisdom and lessons learned from her own life. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of experience and love. "My children," she began, her eyes glistening with both pain and hope, "this world can be unfair and full of people who will hurt you, but you must never let their actions define you. A good name, my daughters, is better than silver and gold. When you keep your hands clean and your heart pure, no matter how hard life gets, your purpose will find you." She turned to Amarachi, placing a weathered hand on her shoulder. "Amara, I know what Chinyere did to you was painful, but never let bitterness take root in your heart. God's time is the best time, and what is meant for you will come back to you." Amarachi nodded, fighting back tears, her mother's words sinking deep into her heart. Her mother's resilience became a source of strength for her, and even though the journey ahead seemed bleak, she found a flicker of hope. Meanwhile, Chinyere's father, who had heard of all that had transpired, took a different view of the situation. To him, Chinyere's actions were not betrayal but bravery. He saw his daughter's move as a bold step in securing her future in a world that favored the strong and cunning. That girl had to fight for herself, he told anyone who cared to listen. The world doesn't reward the weak. Amarachi should have been smarter. His words spread through the village, creating a divide among the people. While some sided with Amarachi, sympathizing with her loss and pain, others whispered that perhaps she had been too trusting, too naive. The betrayal became a topic of endless discussion, and Amarachi's once spotless reputation now bore the weight of unfounded doubts. As days turned into weeks, Amarachi remained focused on helping her family survive, her mother's tales of perseverance and moral fortitude becoming her guiding light. But in her quiet moments, she couldn't help but wonder, would life ever give her the chance to rise again? Amarachi woke up one early morning, her mind made up. She couldn't let her dreams end in the village. The city was tough, but it held the promise of hope, of a second chance. She looked at her mother and said, "Mama, I want to go back to Lagos and try again." Her mother paused, worry lining her face. "Amara, Lagos no be small place. Are you sure?" Amarachi nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "Mama, I cannot give up like this. I will make it. For you, for Ada, and for all of us." But the problem was money. She didn't have a kobo to her name. So, she picked up her hoe and cutlass, heading back to the farm. Day after day, she worked under the scorching sun, planting, weeding, and harvesting for anyone willing to pay her. The soil became her partner in this new hustle, and every naira she earned was like a step closer to her dream. After weeks of hard work, she finally raised 40,000 naira, just enough for the trip and a little extra for food when she arrived. She packed her few belongings into a bag and prepared to leave. On the morning of her departure, Amarachi's mother woke up early and cooked yam and stew for her. She sat her down and held her hands tightly. "My child," her mother began, her voice steady, "you are going back into the world. Remember everything I've taught you. Work hard, stay honest, and trust God. No matter how hard it gets, don't lose hope." Amarachi nodded, her heart swelling with love. Her mother placed her hand on her head and prayed, blessing every step her daughter would take. When the prayer ended, Amarachi stood up, hugged her mother, and said goodbye to Ada. With her bag on her head and hope in her heart, she began her journey back to Lagos. When Amarachi arrived in Lagos after the long, tiring journey, the city greeted her with its usual noise and chaos. But this time, there was no excitement in her heart, only the relief of being back. She made her way to her rented room, pulling her bag behind her, eager to rest and plan her next move. When she reached the compound, the place looked different, quieter, almost unfamiliar. She knocked on her door, but it didn't open. Confused, she knocked again, harder this time. "Who dey there?" A man's voice called from inside. Amarachi stepped back, confused. "Sorry, this is my room," she said. The door creaked open, and a tall, angry-looking man stood there. "Your room? Namide live here now. Who you be?" Before Amarachi could reply, the landlord, Mr. Tund, walked into the scene, his hands tucked behind his back. "Amarachi," he said, adjusting his glasses. "You didn't pay your rent. It expired 2 months ago, and I rented the room to someone else." The words hit her like a slap. She blinked, trying to process what she had just heard. But my things are inside," she stammered, her voice shaky. Mr. Tund nodded toward a corner of the compound. "Your load is there," he said casually, pointing to a small pile of bags and boxes covered with a torn tarpaulin. Amarachi's heart sank. The little she had left in this world was now dumped outside like trash. She stood there, stranded with nowhere to go, her bag still in her hand and tears welling in her eyes. Amarachi sat by the pile of her belongings, her knees pulled to her chest, staring into space. Hours passed, but to her it felt like one long, endless day. Her thoughts swirled, her mother's prayers, her dreams, the struggles that seemed to follow her like a shadow. Finally, she shook herself awake, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and whispered, "Amara, you didn't come back to Lagos to cry. You came to hustle." She looked around the compound, her eyes falling on an uncompleted building just behind it. The structure looked abandoned, with no doors or windows, but at least it had a roof. It wasn't much, but it would be her shelter for now. She picked up her bags and moved in, arranging her things neatly in a corner. The next morning, Amarachi woke up early. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. She began her search for a job, walking from one street to another, knocking on doors and entering shops. When there were no responses or places to apply, she offered to do menial work for neighbors. She washed clothes, swept houses, and even fetched water, earning small amounts to keep herself fed. But the money was barely enough, and each passing day left her more exhausted. One afternoon, she approached a restaurant with a staff wanted sign hanging on the door. Her heart lifted as she entered, but the manager's first words were, "Sorry, no space for females right now. We only need male staff." Amarachi's shoulders sagged as she thanked him and walked out. The rejections were starting to feel personal, and her hope was shrinking. As she walked back to the uncompleted building, her feet dragging on the pavement, she heard a familiar voice call out, "Amara, is that you?" She turned and saw a bright smile beaming at her. It was Amaka, her former classmate from Omoli Grammar School. Amaka looked different now, confident and well-dressed, with a bag slung over her shoulder and a spring in her step. "Amaka!" Amarachi exclaimed, forcing a smile as she wiped the sweat from her brow. The two embraced, and Amaka held her at arm's length, studying her face. "Ah, Amarachi, long time ago. Look at you. What are you doing in Lagos?" "It's a long story," Amarachi replied with a weak laugh. "How about you? You look good." My dear, Lagos no easy but God has been faithful," Amaka said, smiling brightly. "Where are you staying? Are you working?" Amarachi hesitated, unsure of how much to say. "Well, it's a bit complicated." Amaka frowned slightly, her expression turning serious. Amarachi, you can tell me. What's going on?" As they stood by the roadside, the sun beginning to set behind them, Amarachi sat on the edge of the small mattress in Amaka's cramped one-room apartment, her heart heavy as she finished narrating her story. Amaka sat beside her, shaking her head slowly. Amarachi, you've been through too much, she said, her voice soft with pity. This Lagos no day smile, oh, but don't worry. You can stay here with me for now. Thank you, Amaka, Amarachi replied, her voice trembling with gratitude. I'll never forget this kindness. The next morning, after a quick breakfast of bread and tea, Amaka sat Amarachi down for a talk. My sister, let me tell you the truth, she began. Life in Lagos no easy. The way I day survive, no be for everybody. Amarachi tilted her head curiously. What do you do? Amaka sighed and looked away for a moment before speaking. I work in a nightclub. My hustle is mostly at night. She hesitated before adding, I satisfy my clients in kind. Amarachi's eyes widened in shock. Amaka, you mean? Yes, Amaka said bluntly. I no go lie give you. It's not what I planned for my life, but hunger no day wait for dreams. It's the only way I fit survive. Amaka, Amarachi began cautiously. I understand that life is hard, but this isn't the only way. You're smart, and you're beautiful. You can find something better. Better? Amaka cut in, her tone sharp. Where is the better work, Amarachi? Did it find you? Lagos is a jungle, my sister. If you know strong, ego swallow you. Amarachi sighed, but said no more. She understood the pain behind Amaka's words but couldn't agree with her choices. Despite their differences, Amaka was kind. She took care of Amarachi, sharing her food and even giving her money for small personal items. I may not live the life you like, Amaka said one evening, but as long as you're under my roof, I'll make sure you're okay. A week later, Amaka returned home with a piece of good news. Amarachi, I found something for you, she said excitedly. There's an opening for a cook at Ibis Hotel in Ikeja. I know you sabi cook well. I told the manager about you, and he agreed to give you an interview. Amarachi's face lit up for the first time in weeks. Amaka, God bless you. I don't even know how to thank you. Thank me by nailing that interview, Amaka said with a wink. The day of the interview arrived, and Amarachi, dressed in the only neat outfit she had, made her way to Ibis Hotel. Her heart pounded as she entered the sleek building, the polished floors and cool air conditioning a sharp contrast to her humble beginnings. As she sat in the waiting area, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, she whispered a prayer. God, let this be my chance. Meanwhile, back at Quilox, murmurs began to spread among the staff about what truly happened to Amarachi. Some employees whispered that Chinyere had conspired to get her sacked. The rumors reached the manager, Mrs. Esther, who frowned deeply as she listened. I don't tolerate injustice in my establishment, Mrs. Esther said firmly during a staff meeting. I'll set up a team to investigate these claims. If there's any truth to this, there will be serious consequences. Unaware of the brewing storm, Chinyere was miles away, enjoying the benefits of the scholarship that Amarachi had once been promised. She sat in a prestigious university, surrounded by books and opportunities, oblivious to the whispers of truth slowly catching up to her. Back in Ikeja, Amarachi nervously approached the reception desk at Ibis Hotel after her interview. She had given it her best, both the oral and practical tests. The chef had been impressed with her skill and her knowledge of traditional and continental dishes. You've got the job, the HR officer said with a smile, handing her a folder with her offer letter. Welcome to Ibis Hotel as our new assistant head chef. Amarachi's eyes filled with tears of relief. Thank you, sir. I promise to give my best. Later that evening, Amarachi rushed home to share the news with Amaka. She burst into the small room, a wide smile on her face. Amaka, I got the job, Amarachi exclaimed, almost jumping with excitement. Amaka dropped the plate she was washing and turned to her, grinning. My sister, tell me everything. How was the interview? Amarachi sat down, still beaming. It wasn't easy, but I did it. They asked me to prepare egusi soup and jollof rice. And you know how much I love cooking. I poured my heart into it. And the chef even said, You remind me of my mother. Amaka laughed and hugged her. You deserve it, Amarachi. God is really working for you. Amarachi nodded, her smile tinged with gratitude. This is my second chance, Amaka. I won't waste it. Back at Quilox, Chinyere began to feel the heat. The manager's investigation was no longer a rumor. It was real. Panic crept in as she remembered the person who had helped her backdate the transaction. Without wasting time, Chinyere reached out to him. "Remember what we did that day?" she said over the phone, her voice low and urgent. "Don't forget you're as involved as I am. If this gets out, it won't be good for either of us. Keep quiet and take this money." She made plans to send a bribe, while preparing a backup plan to blackmail him if he refused. The weight of her actions began to press heavily, but her fear of being exposed was even greater. Meanwhile, Amarachi woke up before dawn. As the soft light of morning seeped through the window, she knelt to pray, then got ready for her first day at Iba's hotel. But as she reached for her purse, reality struck. She had no money for transport. Her face fell, and she sat back on the bed, staring into space. Amaka noticed and walked over, concern etched on her face. "What's wrong, Amarachi?" Amaka asked, sitting beside her. "I don't even have money for transport," Amarachi said, her voice heavy with embarrassment. Amaka smiled gently, went to her bag, and handed Amarachi some money. "Take this. It's enough for transport and lunch. Don't worry, okay?" Amarachi's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "Amaka, thank you so much. I'll pay you back." "No need," Amaka said with a shrug. "Just go and shine today. I know you'll do well." Amarachi's first day at work was nothing short of remarkable. She worked with dedication, her movements in the kitchen precise and confident. By the end of the day, her supervisor approached her with a smile. "Amarachi, you've done well today," he said. "I can see why they hired you. Keep it up." The words filled her heart with pride, and she couldn't wait to share the news with Amaka. Later that evening, Amarachi returned home to find Amaka in a cheerful mood. They sat together, laughing and talking. Amaka teased Amarachi about how she would soon become a top chef in Lagos. One thing led to another, and the conversation took a serious turn. Amaka's laughter faded, replaced by a distant look in her eyes. "Amarachi," she began softly, "do you know why I do the kind of work I do?" Amarachi shook her head, surprised by the sudden change in tone. "Why?" she asked gently. Amaka sighed deeply. "I was trafficked when I was just 16. It was right after my WAC exams. They promised me a good job in Lagos. I was so excited, thinking I would help my family and build a better life." Her voice trembled as she continued. "But when I got here, it wasn't a job waiting for me. It was a nightmare. I was forced into this life, Amarachi, and now I can't leave. They gave me a target to meet before I can gain my freedom. Mrs. Damalola's men are always watching me, making sure I don't try to escape." Amarachi stared at her friend, her heart breaking for her. "Amaka, this is terrible. You don't deserve this." Amaka forced a weak smile. "It's my reality, Amarachi. But I pray every day that one day I'll be free." The next day at work, Amarachi arrived early as usual, ready to dive into her duties in the kitchen. But just as she was tying her apron, her supervisor walked in. "Amarachi," he called, "we have a situation. The waitress on duty today called in sick. I need you to fill in for her, just for today." Amarachi's heart skipped a beat. "Me? Serve customers?" "Yes, Amarachi," the supervisor replied, smiling. "You're smart and presentable. I know you can handle it." With some hesitation, Amarachi agreed. Soon, she found herself in the dining area, carefully balancing trays and taking orders with a polite smile. As she approached a table with a glass of juice, a well-dressed man seated nearby looked up sharply. His gaze lingered on her, and he called out softly, "Excuse me, miss." Amarachi turned to him. "Yes, sir? How may I help you?" The man studied her face, his eyes widening in recognition. "Are you Amarachi?" he asked, leaning forward. Amarachi blinked in surprise. "Yes, I am. How do you know my name?" "Amarachi," the man said, his voice filled with emotion. "You look exactly like your father. Is your father Mr. Okachukwu?" Amarachi's breath caught. "Yes, that's my father. But how do you know him?" The man smiled, his eyes glistening. "Your father helped me years ago when I was homeless in Abuja. He gave me a place to stay and found me a job in his workshop. I've been searching for him ever since, wanting to thank him properly. Tears welled up in Amarachi's eyes. My father passed away recently, she said softly. The man's face fell. I'm so sorry to hear that. He was a great man. And now, seeing you, I know the kindness he showed me runs in the family. He reached into his pocket and handed her his card. Here, please call me. I want to help you in any way I can. It's the least I can do to honor your father. Amarachi accepted the card, her hands trembling. Thank you, sir, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Meanwhile, back in the USA, Chinyere's perfect life began to crumble. Rumors of her involvement in Amarachi's downfall had reached the CEO's ears, prompting a deeper investigation. The conversation she had with the cashier years ago, the one where they conspired against Amarachi, had been secretly recorded and was now in the hands of the management. Chinyere was summoned for questioning. When confronted with the evidence, she tried to deny it, but the recording was undeniable. You are hereby stripped of all benefits, the stern voice of the CEO declared. Your scholarship is revoked. You will be sent back to Nigeria to face the consequences of your actions. Chinyere returned to Nigeria in disgrace. Upon her arrival, she was immediately arrested and jailed for fraud and conspiracy. While Chinyere sat in a cell, grappling with the fallout of her betrayal, Amarachi held onto the business card she had received, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in a long time. Amarachi clutched the card in her hand, her heart pounding as she arrived at the tall glass building. The man who had recognized her at the hotel greeted her warmly in his office. Amarachi, sit down, he said with a smile. I've been waiting for you. They talked for hours, Amarachi recounting her struggles and dreams. The man listened attentively before asking, What do you want to do, Amarachi? If you could start fresh, what would you pursue? Amarachi hesitated, then said, I want to build something meaningful, a business that helps people, especially women like me who have faced hardship. The man smiled. Then that's what we'll do. Years passed, and Amarachi transformed her life. With the man's support, she grew into a successful businesswoman, known for her resilience and generosity. Her story became an inspiration to many. One of Amarachi's first missions was to help Amaka. She carefully orchestrated Amaka's escape from Mrs. Damalola's clutches, ensuring her freedom. Amarachi went on to set up a thriving business for Amaka, giving her a second chance at life. Meanwhile, back in Chinyere's family home, her father, once proud and boastful, was now a shadow of his former self. The weight of shame bore down on him as news of Chinyere's downfall spread. Unable to bear it any longer, he swallowed his pride and visited Amarachi's mother. Please, he begged, tears in his eyes. Talk to your daughter. Beg her to help Chinyere. She's all I have. Amarachi's mother listened quietly, her heart heavy. She knew the pain of loss and betrayal, but also the strength of forgiveness. Amarachi was later approached by Quillock's management, who offered her a substantial compensation package and a prestigious position as an apology for the injustice she had suffered. But Amarachi, her heart filled with grace, declined the offer. I don't need money or titles, she said. All I wanted was justice, and I have found my peace. I forgive you. After much reflection, Amarachi also decided to forgive Chinyere. She visited the authorities and requested Chinyere's release. However, when Chinyere's father approached her, pleading for her to reconnect with his daughter, Amarachi remained firm. I forgive her, she said calmly, but my chapter with her is closed. I wish her well, but I cannot walk that path with her anymore. As Amarachi left the prison gates, she felt a weight lifted from her shoulders. She had risen above betrayal, transformed pain into purpose, and reclaimed her life. Her journey of forgiveness had not only freed Chinyere, but also freed her own heart. Amarachi stood outside her bustling business complex, watching the sunrise. The golden light bathed her face, a symbol of hope and renewal. She thought back on her journey, the betrayal, the struggles, and the countless tears. Yet, here she stood, stronger, wiser, and filled with gratitude. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. A good name is better than riches, Amarachi. Always let your actions bring light to the world. Amarachi smiled. She had stayed true to those words, and they had guided her through the darkest days. As she walked back inside, she saw Amaka managing her store, a bright smile on her face. Amarachi had not only rebuilt her life, but had helped others find theirs. Her story was a reminder that resilience, kindness, and forgiveness can turn any hardship into triumph. Moral lessons. Life's challenges are not the end, but an opportunity to rise stronger. Never give up. Betrayal and hurt may come from those closest to you, but forgiveness sets you free. Helping others on your journey enriches your own life. A good name truly lasts longer than wealth. Always choose integrity, no matter the circumstance. Truth and kindness pave the way for success. Amarachi's story teaches us that every setback can be a setup for a remarkable comeback. What are your thoughts on this journey of resilience, forgiveness, and redemption? Have you ever faced a situation that tested your patience and strength? Share your thoughts and lessons in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Tales by Foxy, and share this story with someone who might need encouragement today. Let's spread hope and inspiration together.
Hi, live